Okay. Okay. Hello. All right, so I'm going to start us up. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. Power, please. Power me up. Power. In the name of the one who was and is to come. Amen. Please be seated. So today I want to talk about the gospel story. I want to talk about giving, particularly the woman who gave the 2 mites. You hear that term occasionally, 2 small coins that Jesus focuses on. I want to talk about temple geography. Where did Jesus notice this woman doing it? And then finally, I want to talk about kind of maybe the larger point he's trying to make, and it's probably not about sacrificial giving. It's about Jesus becoming a true king, and in the larger arc of the Gospel of Mark, I hope to do a little bit of context making for you. So that's what we're going to accomplish today. So let's first talk about giving and the widow's story. I've heard so many quotes about this text. She has nothing left, but finds her everything in God, and that's from a prominent world faith leader. I'm suspicious of that. I'm not sure if that's the point that Jesus is trying to make. He obviously wants people to give with their heart, minds, and souls, but I'm suspicious. I've got a little bit of doubt. You haven't given all you can until you've given all you have. You haven't given all you can until you've given all you have. And that's a prominent United States big church faith leader. So I want to hopefully give you a context where you can say giving to the bone is not the point that Jesus is trying to make, I don't think. But it's also doubly confusing because we often will pair the lectionary readings with the widow of Zarephath, where she's going to make her very last meal before she dies, and she gives that meal to the prophet, and that's commended. But I hope if we see Jesus where he is in the temple, the point he's trying to make, maybe we don't have to go there. I do say that giving feels good, and it creates safeguards for those on the margins. It opens our hearts, it creates a more just society around us, and creates a kinder and gentler way of being in fellowship with each other. That's the stuff I'm going to hang my hat on. But I still propose to you that's not the primary point that Jesus is trying to make in Mark chapter 12. Temple geography is what I want to talk about to give you that sense. Where we are is as important as what is being said. So Jesus is in the temple, and I'm going to do some maps here, and I know it might be a little bit confusing. I don't want you to try to read every detail of the map because you won't be able to, but we are in the Jerusalem temple before it was destroyed. And in there you can see that Jesus is likely, in Mark 12, sitting on the steps of Nicanor's gate. I've got my little minifig of Jesus, and you see the little steps going up, and I'm going to give you an eagle's eye view in a second. This is the larger scope of what the inner parts of the temple look like. You've got this big sort of square cross thing on the right, and then you've got the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies on the left. The big brown circle is where I'm going to focus on. because Jesus is at Nicanor's gate, like I showed you a second ago, and he's looking across that big square. He's looking across to see across in the women's court where not just her, but many people were making a public display of giving. As Americans, that makes us really uncomfortable, I think. We don't want to hear about how much each other has given. It makes us like allergic often. But in this world, people would go and it was like a public display. They had these little chutes that you would put your money in, and then that would be the thing that people would draw and play trumpets about. Like if you were really rich, you might have somebody going, "Doo, doo, 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 look at this guy." That's the stuff he's taking issue with. And so he notices this woman kind of bending down to put in 2 copper coins, all that she has to live on, and that's what he's observing. These 2 coins is what he highlights, and I think if we put it in the larger context of the temple, he is noticing her, but he's not celebrating her. He's noticing her, he's not celebrating her, he's making an observation that is largely about the other people around her who are making these big shows, literally blasting trumpets about how generous they are. Jesus becoming the true king, this is the last section I'm going to focus on, is probably the larger point. Mark wants you to know that Jesus is becoming the completion of God's purposes. And the temple had failed, kept failing, and the people were constantly failing and letting people, like the woman with the widow's mite, fall through the cracks. If you were a widow in the ancient Near East, your employment prospects, your financial prospects could be very dire if you didn't have family around you. So it's an indictment of a whole community that chose not to care for the least of these. And that's what Mark wants to talk about in the last sort of act, if you will, of the Gospel of Mark. So I'm going to do a super broad overview of 5 chapters of Mark. In Mark 11, you've got the Palm Sunday piece, Jesus going into the temple. This is the context building for where we're going to get to. Then he goes in and he sees the temple as a messed up. So triumphal entry, cleans house. He's really upset by everything that he sees. And then the leaders of the temple are going, "Who do you think you are? How dare you do all these things? You are too big for your britches." That's right before he notices the woman in the women's court giving her 2 copper coins, and all of the failures of the temple that he had observed up to that point almost found their focus point in this one woman's experience. Generous, faithful, true believer in all the goodness of the temple, and the temple had failed her. I say this because the very next thing he says after the woman who gave the 2 coins is everything's going to be terrible. The city and the temple will be destroyed. Everybody's going to be persecuted, but Jesus will return. Moving past that towards the Jesus becoming true king, you've got chapter 14 and 15 about the Last Supper and his trial, and then finally the crucifixion. And this crucifixion would lead to this sense of fear and wonder and bewilderment, and we're not sure if that's the end or not because God is constantly moving, doing new things, doing great things. So that's what I want you to see about this story. It's a celebration of what the temple could be. It's a celebration of who we could be. And I want you to think about giving, not so much as giving to the bone, but giving with your very center of your being to make the world around you better. Give because it nourishes and protects. Worship the one who is sitting on the steps of the temple gates, looking across, seeing her, seeing us, and doing everything he can to lift us up to be people who are people of peace and people of beauty. Finally, there is a king who became king in the end act of Mark, and that king charges us to lift each other up. And that's a privilege, that's a duty, and that's a joy. And I hope we can take the story of the widow's mite and make it our own and make it a place where we can become a people caring for each other. Amen. Straight.